update on where RIDE is with the reopening, returning to school process. Good morning, Anna.
Good morning. Thank you for inviting me, Terry. And I see lots of familiar faces, so good morning to you all. Sarah, pay attention to the road. You're making me super nervous. But I'm happy to go through the pre-submitted questions and then take as many questions as we can before our time is up. We've been working with the districts pretty closely. I was telling Terry just before we started, I've been meeting with superintendents weekly, sometimes twice weekly, just trying to help them get questions answered and be a conduit between them and RIDO, so that we are able to have some conversations with the RIDO team. We meet with them at least 3 or 4 times a week, just kind of walking through where we are today, what the data looks like, and how we can best set up some structures so that the districts can be successful and have the data they need to open. So Friday, all of the districts' plans are due to RIDE. We'll be reviewing them for feedback. We've targeted some health and safety measures that they'll be required to submit. So we'll just be looking to make sure that they're able to meet all of those and that they have plans in place for school on August 31st. And we will be supporting them as they work their way through that. So our feedback will be mostly around, yeah, this meets the health and safety criteria, or you may need to ramp this up, or how can we help you get to point A or point B or whatever it is that you're looking for. So I'm looking forward to reviewing those. We've been talking about them for quite a few weeks now together, but there's still a lot of unknowns. I mean, right now, based on the data that we received from RIDO yesterday, we're still on track for a full reopening on August 31st. But that could change, and that's what I keep reminding the superintendents. The reason why we asked for a range of plans is if our data changes, then our plan has to change. So if our cases start to go up, we have to reconsider what our opening looks like. But for right now, our data looks really good. Although yesterday I did notice, we haven't met again since yesterday's numbers came in, but I did notice there was a spike yesterday, the first time we've been over 100 in a while. So I'm gonna hope that's a one-day thing and not a trend. But those are all things that when we talk to RIDO about, they keep us kind of, we have our tracker of where we are in terms of reopening according to the data. So for now, we are still on track, but that may change. So I think our word with the superintendents is always flexibility, flexibility, flexibility. We have to be ready to shift based on the data. So Terry, I don't know if you want to go through the questions.
Yes, I would like to do that.
Sure.
So, and I'm just gonna, I guess I'm gonna take them in the order that they came in. So the first question is, it really revolves around private schools. And is there, do you know if there's any CARES funding for private schools for additional costs associated with the opening, for cleaning, et cetera?
So we received $50 million of CARES funding for the districts, and that went to them in a formula. And I'm going to tell you, I don't know if private schools are a part of that formula, but that is one I can email you back on.
Okay.
I had that email sent out to my finance team, but I don't think I've gotten a response yet. I'll check right before we get off, but I didn't look at the allocations. I just know that we received $50 million to divide amongst the districts.
Okay.
I'll follow up on the private school piece.
Thanks.
Private schools were a part of our ESSER funding, so we received federal money via the title formula, and that did have an allotment for private schools. I'm not sure about this second bucket of money.
And has that already been dispersed, or?
I think it was available to districts via Excel grants, which is our vehicle for distributing funds this week.
Okay, okay, thank you. Excel grants, all right. What about, so I guess when you talk about flexibility, you must be providing for the option of hybrid learning, and is that going to be solely, I assume when somebody asks me about hybrid, they mean some distance learning and some at home learning. And I guess according to your plan, you're hoping to do the elementary school is going to be more, you're hoping best case scenario to be more on site, and then, but can you speak to that a little bit?
Sure. So right now we're on track for a full reopening, which means everybody gets in school time. And for some of the districts, I know just from having met with them, that for middle and high school, that may mean alternating days or alternating schedules, but everyone will get in-person time. In our partial plan, if our data were to begin to change and RIDO says we're not going to open in full reopening, we're going to open in the partial plan, we still have targeted to bring back all of elementary. We've shared with the districts, and this is available on our website, all of the data we're receiving from medical professionals and research is that young children are not the ones who are most likely to get COVID, nor are they likely to spread COVID. Again, I'm not a doctor. All I can do is read what the research says. And that is what the American Association of Pediatrics has put out. And we have some other research studies on our website that speak to the same thing. So we have continued to target, even in the partial return, that elementary K-5 would come back every day full time. The benefits far outweigh the risks from, again, per the medical professionals. And so that's what we're targeting. Only in the limited return, again, our priority would still be elementary, but smaller numbers of kids would return if we were in that deeper level of spread, community spread.
So regardless of where we are with numbers, school would start on August 31st, just whether it was on distance or on site. Is that
Correct.
right?
It would be on-site, hybrid, or distance learning, but August 31st is the first day of school.
We're definitely starting
Yeah.
school on the 31st.
Yeah.
Nothing's going to change that piece. Okay.
Right.
Are there any considerations being made to add arts integration safely into all K-12 districts with necessary funding as needed so children and adolescents can process anxiety, depression, fear as back to school in any formula or format begins? I'll just stop right there because that's it's a long question, but I did read that you have some arts, you have been consulting with the arts, the state arts council and music councils, is that right?
Yes, we haven't gotten deep into the type of learning that that person is asking in the question, but we have been working with both the Arts Council and the Music Council for how to do that safely in school and to provide opportunities for students to continue to take part in both of those. But we have not talked about deeply embedding it into curriculum
Right.
in the way that's being asked.
What about social emotional learning? Because I think that's
That is a component of the plan. They have to tell us how they're going to meet how they're going to ramp up and meet some of the social emotional concerns. We also have an array of professional development for teachers and staff just before the start of school that we'll make available on social emotional learning and supports for students specific to the pandemic. I mean, we're always working on social emotional supports, but in particular now, we know that students have really been struggling. And so we want to provide some ramp up in terms of what we can give for teachers to be able to support students.
And that's up to the districts to find the resources out of the extra 50 million. Is that one of the things?
In addition to what we're providing. So we're trying to provide some and that's always free of charge to the districts. But in addition, I know that many districts are looking at that. We also put in, so we've asked for some CARES money from RIDE in order to provide the districts additional supports. And one of the buckets of money that we've asked for is to be able to grant out to districts money for additional social emotional FTEs. So if you need more social workers or school psychologists or school counselors, or even some funding to partner with a community agency. So I know that in Portsmouth, we used to partner with Newport County Mental Health. So there's a little bit of funding in there if districts wanted to do that. So we have not gotten our CARES money approved yet by the state. So hopefully they approve that amount of money and then we'll be able to provide some additional support to the districts in terms through grants that they can use to fund some additional services. But I know many of them have planned for it within their own budgets.
Great. Okay, thank you. Is there a protocol or communication system for what to do when a child or a child's family member become test positive? How do you deal with quarantine, and if somebody in the pod, in the group, tests positive, what is the plan around that?
So that's driven by the Department of Health. They would guide those decisions and they would directly support the school. They also have, this week they're putting out their childcare playbook, which speaks to, so if a child in daycare gets sick or a family member gets sick, and it's kind of a flow chart of what to do and what happens. There will be a K-12 playbook. They're still working on it because it's so much more complex than, you know, what's happening for the summer right now, that it's still a work in motion. We're still working on it. We keep iterating on it, but it is, our hope is to have it out before school starts. I think our target timeline is 2 weeks from now that it will be ready, but that helps lay out for, we've asked every school to have a liaison for Rido. In most places, it's the school nurse leader and the school nurse at the school level who would contact Rido, and they would help them, walk them through, you know, what it is that happens in terms of what to do about the child, any quarantine, any of the things that have to happen. So there is they call it a playbook because that's what it looks like. It's kind of like a step-by-step, but they will also be the ones who communicate and interact with the school.
Are we anticipating a higher need for substitute teachers, do you think?
So we've been looking at a lot of the studies out there, and I know many districts are doing surveys of their staff, but we anticipate there will be a cadre of teachers who might be in that high risk category who may not be able to come back. And although I know many districts are working to solve for that, I don't think they'll be able to solve for all of it. And so we do anticipate there will be a higher need for substitute teachers.
Okay. The next question is, I have 4 children in public school, an active neighborhood, a husband who travels for work, and an ex-husband with 3 children in a different district. How are groups of 30 possibly stable? My children have over 120 contacts alone. So if your group, I guess, and I was thinking about this myself, if your pod is your classmates, you know, once you leave the home, there is an exposure to a larger group. And how's that being, what's Ride's thinking about that? Or is that
we can only control what happens within the school hours. I'm the mother of 6 kids. Many of you know that. So I understand the fear, the contact number in our home, even just, and my kids are older now. I've only got 2 that are still in K-12, but I've still got, you know, 1 in college and 2 who came home during the COVID, but all work different places and are connected to different people. So, I mean, you have to set up kind of your own criteria. And this is not a Ride recommendation, P.S. This is just kind of like I've lived with this too and been trying to figure it out. Like we have our own little system. Like you come home, you change, you wash up, you know, you have a clean set of clothes that you put on, and we just try to minimize that. It's tricky. It's going to be hard. And that's why the playbook is so intricate for schools because of all those connections. Because in many cases, not only will you have your children, they might be linked to a, you know, another set of children, but you might be a teacher in a different district. So now you're connected to a pod where you're spending every day with 30 students. So the web is so intricate that the playbook is taking a long time to think out because of all these scenarios. But all I would say to folks who are in the similar situation as myself with big families, I think it's just on us to figure out how what we can do on our end to continue that prevention after hours, because all we can do is support what happens in the building, but after hours we have to count on families to keep up the work.
Okay, thank you. Yeah.
I'm sorry, that's not a good right answer. I'm just sharing it as a mom who's been living with this for the last few months and trying to figure it out.
Can you talk about transportation a little bit for people? I know I think we have teachers and parents on, and school committee members on, and maybe not everybody knows what transportation is going to be looking like.
Sure. So what Rido puts out, they put out 2 things. They put out both regulation, which is required, and they put out guidance. So our initial guidance around transportation was around minimizing 2 things, the risk of transmission and the risk of infection. And so the CDC guidelines was 1 child in every other seat. And we said that's untenable. No one will be able to return to school if that's what it looks like. And so our Rido team said, well, you could put 1 kid. Again, it's all about the risk in terms of rate of infection and rate of spread. So how do we limit both of those things? And sometimes they play off of each other. So we've gone back to RIDO several times because districts are still struggling with the model of one child in every seat. And so RIDO's pushback has been, well, that's just guidance. And so I'm like, but being a former superintendent, I'm like, that's not good enough. I can't just go back and say to my families, oh, that's okay. That's just guidance. We're going to do this instead. So I've asked them to model out some other scenarios so that superintendents have more information at their fingertips to make these decisions. There are some seeding and some modeling that could get more students on the bus that may increase the rate of spread, because anytime you add more kids, there's more spread, right? So if you even add one more child, you're adding more spread, but could limit the risk of exposure just in terms of how you seat them on the bus. And what we're using is the model they use for airplanes and how you decide who's quarantined on a bus. And another thing that's a little easier for smaller districts is that if children share a pod, that's essentially like a second family member because they're with those kids all day. So as you're planning, it really involves a lot of intricate bus seating, which I know as a superintendent and many of you who work in districts, we have not gone to this level of detail of saying, you know, Terry, you sit in the last seat on the bus and you can only sit next to Emily because you both are in the same pod. It's intricate, but you can put more kids on the bus if they share a pod. They are sharing the day together anyway, so you can treat them like siblings. So that's another way to look at how you pod buses. Again, depending on the size of your district, that may or may not be another way that you can get more students on the bus. But we are getting RIDO to give us their format for airplane seating so that districts can look at that, share with their families, and decide what works. And for me, that's the most important part. As a superintendent, I want to be able to go to my families and say, we want to get all your kids to school. Here's what we're doing. Show it to everyone. Show them what happens. Show them who will be quarantined and what happens so they can have a good understanding of that. And get, you know, if everyone's okay with this, then that's how we move forward. And if not, we have to just keep going back to the drawing board and figuring it out. We've been working very deeply with Providence since Providence is really under RIDE takeover. And they have worked very deeply on the bus routes. And I'll tell you that podding for them and keeping track of who's on pods and siblings is very complicated. And they've hired an additional staff member to make it work, but we are like this close. So I keep telling everybody else, if we can get this close in Providence, I know we can do it in other places. And we're happy to try to help. And, you know, not everyone can hire someone else to come on board and do that work, but we can do our best to try to help them and to provide them with the tools to do it.
Thank you. Great. Will each district be able to determine what grades can return to school in person and how, or will there be one statewide determination applicable to all, like the statewide calendar, which I think you've kind of answered that, but
there'll be a statewide decision on which model we're using.
Okay.
But RIDO has left it open that if for some reason there's a particular community or school or district that for some reason has a spike in cases, they will handle that directly, and that could be a one-off. So I don't want anyone to assume that for, you know, the whole school year everybody will be in the same place. If something happens in the data over the course of the school year, RIDO will intervene and push them to
so
something else.
Potentially one district could be on one plan and the other
The goal is for everyone to be the same, but they didn't want to leave that out. For example, although it's more stable right now, at one point Central Falls was on a very large escalation in terms of cases. And so if that were to happen again, Central Falls might be treated differently than the rest of the state. But the goal is to use the data statewide because we have too many crossovers. We have too many folks who teach in other districts, who live in another district, and the spread is going to happen. And so it makes more sense from the data perspective to use a state decision.
Okay. This is a two-part question. With the benefits of ACE, remote learning, she's using a word I'm not familiar with, I'm sorry,
Asynchronous?
Asynchronous, thank you. Remote learning greatly outweighing the benefits of synchronous remote learning. Why is this method of teaching not being encouraged for public schools in Rhode Island? And could synchronous teaching methods be looked at as one reason why so many students struggled with remote learning last spring? You're going to have to give me a little bit. I don't really, that's teacher speak, so I'm not really sure what you're talking about.
Sure. So asynchronous learning is you give a child an assignment, they work independently, they do all the work online, and then they might submit it to you or have a touch base. The synchronous learning is the teacher is engaged in the class online with the students. We're working in breakout groups or we're working together. And I would say there's not clear evidence that one is better than the other. And all we can go by is what we saw over the last several months, which is that distance learning wasn't up to the level of what in-person learning would be. And that's why our goal is in-person learning over distance learning. But we also need to continue to improve our distance learning. And that's something that we're going to continue to provide. That calendar, the unified calendar, has 8 professional development days.
I saw that.
That RIDE will provide professional development during. Districts do not have to do it. They are welcome to use those days for their own professional development, but we will be offering more professional development on improving both synchronous and asynchronous learning, on distance learning in general, and providing some support with some, we had made some partnerships with some online platforms that could support distance learning for teachers over the March, April, May, June. We're looking for more partners to be able to do that. And we're also working with an organization that's going to help us pull together all the best practices that we had from our spring time of distance learning and continue to grow that so that we can share that back with teachers as an area where we can kind of become a toolkit for where people can go and look for some lessons or some things, some training around how to be better at the distance learning component. So it is an option in, I'm going to imagine, in almost everyone's hybrid plans, some form of synchronous and asynchronous learning. But I don't think we're at the level where it's the kind of quality that we would prioritize over in-person learning.
Okay. Is there any conversation occurring about the possibility that the state sets in place a comprehensive and unified plan for all school districts to adhere to, which will ensure safety for all and ultimately meet the needs of all Rhode Island children? I think we've kind of touched on that districts need some flexibility.
Yeah, they're unified regulations. Everyone's got to follow the regulations that are put out by RIDO. But other than the regulations, the rest of it is flexible because it's going to be unique to each district.
Okay. Okay, so this is a multi-part question. We'll take one at a time, and I do want to leave some time for people who are online to ask some questions. But this says, I work in a district's high school, and I'm concerned that the draft plans I have seen or heard about from traditional comprehensive high schools in multiple districts do not do anything to reduce the number of students who teachers see in the classroom within the 2-week quarantine period, and do not do as much as they could do to reduce the number of classmates students see in classes within the quarantine period. And maybe you can talk to us about what the quarantine period is. That different than the 14 days, but I thought you would be at home during that time. Mm-hmm. In other words, in a 7 or 8 period schedule, teachers see all students on their rosters within 1 or 2 weeks. If one person tests positive, how many others will need to quarantine? I'll just stop there. It does go on, but that seems like the gist. So
I haven't seen, as I mentioned, the plans are due Friday. I haven't seen all the plans, but I have been working with quite a few districts, some one-on-one support and some, we've done some peer review where a few districts have gotten together to kind of share what they're doing across. And I've not seen anyone who's operating under the premise of doing a full 7 or 8 period day as if they were back to normal with all 100% of their students. I haven't seen that.
Okay.
So I know some have even considered, folks who may have been and a block schedule, which is only 4 classes a day. They've even talked about doing the 4 blocks they would do is a 2 and 2 where they do math and science and English and social studies, but electives would be via distance learning, and they would stagger grades coming in or parts of grades. So I've seen a lot of work, particularly at the high school, because high schoolers can do distance learning in a better way than elementary kids have. So I've seen a lot of that. I don't know that I've seen a plan yet that had all 8 periods. That would mean that they are able to plan for a lot of mask wearing during the day, and that they have classrooms that can space kids a reasonable distance apart. 3 feet is kind of what we hope for. 6 feet is the ideal, but that's impossible in a classroom setting. I've yet to get into a classroom where I thought you could put 20 desks 6 feet apart, but 3 feet
Right.
is the American Association of Pediatrics kind of highlight. Their gold star is 3 feet. So that's what we're hoping for in high schools, facing the same direction, staggered bell ringing so you don't have every kid emptying into the hallway. So I've seen a lot of that. I haven't seen what's mentioned. If that's something that showed up in a plan, we would ask a lot of questions. What are you doing to maintain safety if this is what's happening? So.
Okay. Can you talk about testing and what this next question just says, I've heard there is no plan for randomized sample COVID testing of faculty, staff, and students. But can you talk about what?
Sure, I don't have all of the details on this. There is a testing work stream. Although I'm on a lot of work streams, I'm not on the testing one. I just hear the summary. I know that there have been 92,000 tests dedicated to K-12 from now until December. I have heard the governor talk about increasing that number so that we have even more than that. And they are working on a plan for some asymptomatic testing that would be available to teachers. I think that there was still a lot of debate on whether we would offer it to students, just because of the logistic and the parent permissions and all of the things that you would have to do to be able to do that. Although then I think they were talking about high schoolers might be an easier place to do that. Parents might be more likely to be okay with their high schooler doing asynchronous testing. So I don't know where they left that decision, but there will be an offering of some kind of testing. Like I said, 92,000 tests have been dedicated to K-12, and that's just through December. With, I know the governor saying, that they need to find some more for us. And we're pushing for the rapid testing so that there's not a delay in when folks find out if they're positive or negative. But I don't have the details on that, Terry.
And
I'm
you
sorry.
don't know if they would come to the school or if they'd have to go, teachers have to go out to a testing site.
I don't know. I think we have talked about mobile testing units. I know I've heard them talk about that. I know that, and maybe when we unmute, maybe Chris has heard some other info about school nurses and will they be able to do any testing? I don't know. I know that they had talked about a lot of options at some point. So.
Okay. Okay.
That'll get firmer in the next couple of weeks. So I can certainly update you, Terry, but I don't have that info
All right.
today.
Well, thank you. Classroom ventilation does not appear to be mentioned in RIDE guidelines, but there is substantial evidence that COVID can spread asymptomatically via aerosol particles from breathing and speaking that can linger in the air for hours. So is there any talk about ventilation or?
There is. So keeping windows open when possible for as much of the day as possible, weather permitting. Even on the buses, that's some of the guidance that you should keep some of the, as many of the bus windows open as possible when the weather allows. We're always careful to say that I wouldn't want anyone to keep the windows down while it was pouring rain into the bus. But whenever you can keep airflow moving, that is a helpful thing. So we know that outside is better than inside. So whenever we can, provide some air, I think that's a good thing. So if it's available and you can do it, there is a recommendation around keeping windows open when possible.
Okay. And I know there's people on the call that are interested to talk about outdoor, like alternative learning in outdoor spaces. Uh,
Absolutely. I know a school that has an awesome outdoor classroom they should use as much as possible.
yes, and I think there's designs on, other
Yeah.
changing that. I'm sure you're going to get questions on that when we open it up. I'm looking to see, I think I've kind of gone through, the questions that were submitted online. So I think we could, Donna, we could unmute people, or how do you want to handle that? I'm asking my person in the background, do you want to have people raise their hands if they want to speak?
There's a mechanism, it's called reactions. If people can do their little hand raise, then we can kind of get to them one at a time, and I can then unmute them.
Okay. So does anybody want to start? I got Kelly and I got Francis. And Francis, she is one of the people that submitted a lot of these questions, so maybe she's got something more. Let's unmute Francis and then we'll go to Kelly.
Oh, did I do it myself?
There you are.
Okay.
You've got the floor.
Okay. So I'm on the task force for Middletown Public Schools. I'm working with the 4th through 6th at God A. And one of the things that we were talking about was that there are people who are absolutely not sending their kids back to school. Like under any circumstances, they are like, my kid is not going back to school. My plan is to do whatever the distance learning plan is. I'm not sending my kid back to school. And I think that there's going to be a lot of that. So I didn't know if the state was like, yes, no, you need to have a full distance learning plan and a full in-person plan. And obviously, because we don't know if Monday they're in school and Tuesday things shut down, so you're going to have a plan anyway. But I didn't know if you'd heard anything from any of the other districts about families that are just like, nope, they're not riding the bus, they're not going in the classroom. I am just going to do whatever the distance learning plan is and call it a day.
So there's not a state policy around that decision. What RIDO has put out and what RIDE is supporting is that if a child has a medical reason and a note from a doctor, you should provide distance learning for that child. Anything else would be a district level policy. I had a meeting with RIASC, which is the School Committee Association, very early on, and I know they had talked about a model policy. I don't know if they've gotten any further in development on that, but that will be something that's at the school committee level. So what we have supported is if there's a medical reason, you have a medical note, you need to provide distance learning. We also have an RFP out from the state for a full online learning platform that would allow for some of the medically fragile students to take part in a full school environment and take some of that burden off the districts. We will not have enough funding to do it probably for the whole state. It'll probably be an allocation per district of students they prioritize for that online school.
Okay, so note from a doctor. Other than that, that's going to be a school committee based district superintendent type thing.
Yep, it would be a policy decision.
Okay.
Kelly?
Hi, thanks both for taking the time to do this, and I apologize for a little bit of multitasking with work at the same time.
That's okay.
Gotta do what you gotta do, right? So, my question is really around the differences between districts. You pointed out that a lot of these decisions will be made at the district level and taking into consideration differences between districts or their unique situations. And I guess my question is more around messaging and how RIDE can help support the messaging that districts are using the information that they have and the unique circumstances that they're facing to make the best decisions that they can for their districts. I think we saw specifically with graduation as an example, how many different scenarios people came up with and pushback from all different levels about, well, you shouldn't do this, that's not safe enough, or why can't we do this? Other people found a way to do it. And I expect to hear and see more of that this coming school year. Just again, differences in why are they able to bring back through 8th grade and you guys can only bring back 6th grade or what? And as you point out, busing, things like that, they're all different. So does RIDE have a plan on messaging around that, or how can you help with that?
Well, again, Kelly, I guess what I said before is we've been encouraging everyone to provide the scenario that makes it safe for parents to bring back students, particularly elementary. And I know that some districts are going to find it very difficult to run a parallel system with the number of staffing that they have and the unknown factor of how many kids are actually in that position. And so that's why we've encouraged them to stay tight to the medical note. And if they're going to allow for something else, then they're going to have the resources to be able to provide for the something else. And that may end up being the best reason for having a model policy from RIASC so that there's some consistency. I know that that tends to be a way where we can keep things pretty similar across a lot of districts. But even then, it's not always every district that does that. And so I think you're right. I'm hoping it's not quite to the level that graduation ended up going. But we have been talking about that. I mentioned that at RISA yesterday. I said, be careful. I hear you guys all going down a lot of different roads. You're going to end up in graduation town. Like it's just going to be hard to manage. And so I know that the difference here is we've been working in peer groups. So for the most part, peers within the areas, East Bay, West Bay, South County, and Northern have been working together. So I hope when I see their plans that similarity will come through, at least around the localized areas. So, you know, maybe Northern isn't doing what the East Bay is doing, but for the most part, the East Bay is doing a similar thing.
Yeah, thank you. That certainly helps. And I was glad to hear that they were working together and
Yeah.
collaborating a lot on that too. Definitely, you see more comparisons between your neighboring and
Of course.
county districts than across the state. So thank you.
Right. So just
Terri.
for those on the call that don't know, Kelly is the chair of the Middletown School Committee, and thank you for your questions this morning. Thanks for being on the call, Kelly. I'd like to recognize Bob Marshall, please.
Hi.
Good morning.
Good morning. If we could go back for a minute to when you were talking about priorities with the hybrid models for different class levels and age levels, are there similar priorities in place for people with intellectual disabilities and students with communications disabilities?
Yes, so there are. So the priority is elementary, and then students who are both, there are different levels of multilingual learners, but our most intensive learners we would want to bring back, and also our students who are differently abled, who cannot acquire their education via the distance learning, should be prioritized for in-person learning.
Okay. And when you talked about the, my other question, I think you've answered, when you talked about the medical letter, that would apply to people whose disability puts them in a situation where they are not able to come back because they would be compromising themselves.
Correct, that higher risk level of ailment that meets the COVID-19 criteria, the CDC criteria for higher risk.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Are there other questions? I don't see, looking to see. Oh, Emily? Can we recognize, and this is the chairwoman of the Portsmouth School Committee. Good morning, Emily.
Thank you for taking my question. And just so you know, Terry, Jonathan Kavak's had his hand up.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay. I was looking for the
But I'm
little.
going to take my option. Anna, thank you for doing this. This is really great. Yesterday we had a RIAS meeting, and the question kind of following along the lines of what Francis was asking about the providing, say a second grade teacher has, her classroom, and then just like kids get sick, now they're out for 2 weeks, et cetera, then they have to come back in, and filming or photographing what goes on in the classroom. So at Bryant now, where I teach, every class is going to be recorded so that kids could, or students could look at it afterwards. Is there any RIDE guidance, or what are your thoughts about recording classrooms to maybe going back to this hybrid model and what being able to participate. Some students participate virtually, some students participate in person, but that would involve, not necessarily filming all the kids in the class, but it might involve, they would be caught on camera. What do you think about that?
So I know there are some districts who have been talking about and are working with MOUs with their local bargaining units around being able to do that. That's something that they would have to talk about with their union, and whether that's something that people would be willing to do. And I know in some, one of the districts, it was volunteer. So if a teacher was willing to be videotaped, and they were trying to get a volunteer at each grade level. So I don't know where they ended up in that, but that's something that really you would have to work out with your bargaining unit.
Okay, so we'll go to Jonathan and then we'll go to Kate Holtman.
Thanks so much. Anna and Terry, first, thank you for doing this. And Emily, thank you for teeing me up there. In full disclosure, right, I'm the CEO of Oliver Hazard Perry, Rhode Island. I run a statewide not-for-profit that works in the experiential education space. But my background is in traditional education, and there are a couple things that are of a little bit of concern to me. One is that, as you discuss the plan for moving forward for in-person learning, single row, rows with everybody facing the same direction, that is an absolute regression of contemporary educational pedagogy. Right?
Agreed.
Like, oh my God, we've made it so far in terms of experiential learning. And I look at the experience that Met School students have in place-based learning. And I'm very fearful that in our desire to get students back to school, we're trying aggressively to return to an antiquated model with more antiquation in it, rather than seeing this as a real opportunity for innovation, place-based learning, and frankly, for the cultural institutions and educational institutions in our state, there could and should be a much deeper relationship where the students are learning by going to these places and doing that. And I think the relationships that could exist with these institutions could be used for in-classroom, for synchronous, for asynchronous. I mean, in every different facet, more meaningful relationships with our educational resources in state, I think should be front and center. I share with you, I think here in Portsmouth, they did an exceptional job with distance learning. I will also tell you that my bright, precocious first grader was often bored to tears with a lot of the distance learning, despite having an exceptional first grade teacher in Val 70. But also I looked at the virtual field trips to the San Diego Zoo, and there are students that have never been to Pardon Gray or the Roger Williams Park, or any of these amazing cultural institutions, either here on Aquidneck Island or more broadly in the state. And I think with all of the wonderful efforts that the governor has made, and RIDO has made, and RIDE is making in terms of seeking out alternative experience and innovative partnerships, I want to see more of that, not less of that, as we go forward for planning the 2021 school year.
Yeah, I'm adding you to my list, Jonathan, because we did partner with a bunch of Rhode Island locations at the end of the year to create virtual field trips in Rhode Island for students. So I'm going to add you to my list for that purpose. But I agree. I want to tell you, I did have like a high blood pressure moment when Rido said, well, what do you mean schools have tables? Just have them get rid of those and order desks. I was like, I think I just spent the last 20 years of my life trying to get rid of desks. I am not asking people to buy desks, but there's just, that's more around the safety of kids are facing the same. I completely agree. It's more around the health piece of keeping them separated and facing in one direction. But we do have some models for tables and how you can best space those and that. But I agree. It's definitely, in terms of pedagogy, it's a total reversal of what we know works well and is good for kids. And we have been encouraging the use of whatever space you have that allows you to be free of that restriction. For example, an outdoor classroom. Just mindful that not every place in the state has space where they can do that kind of thing, or access to some of the resources that may be available to other districts. So it's kind of that balance, but we are definitely, as we continue to ramp up and improve our distance learning, looking to improve options around the state. So I'm tagging you, Jonathan, with helping us do something at the Oliver Hazard Perry.
Excellent.
Terry?
We could make that connection.
Yeah.
So we'll go to Kate Holtman and then Cody Sharp.
We also have Sarah
Okay.
Turgeon, and we have
Yeah,
Sophia
Sarah.
as well.
Okay. We'll take them in that order, Donna. So Kate, you have the floor. But you need to unmute. You need to unmute Kate. There we go.
Hi, Terry and Anna. Thank you so much
Good
for
morning.
coming to do this. I do have a question around the use of masks and where we are in guidance on requiring masks, and if districts wanted to implement a policy requiring it, would they have the ability to do that?
You do. One of the things that I talked about the superintendents because they ask this question all the time. And I said, what we have to be mindful of is students need to build up a tolerance for mask wearing. If you think that by implementing a policy and saying everybody must wear, third grade and up must wear a mask all day, every day, and that's just going to happen, I'm not sure it makes sense as a policy, but as an educational tool that we accustom kids to and grow their tolerance for day after day, so you can get to a place in time where kids can wear a mask every day. I mean, as an adult, and excuse me, I only work from home 2 days a week. This is my day at home. I'm in my son's room with the Minecraft posters, so forgive me. I know it's not very professional looking, but I have not learned to do a Zoom background, so that's what I get. But when I go to work, you know, I wear a mask, and I have to tell you, when I started wearing a mask at the beginning of this, even I couldn't keep it on all day. You have to build up your tolerance. And that's been my pushback to the superintendents, is rather than thinking about making it, you know, a policy. And in our guidance, we're pretty clear about, let's not make this punitive. We have to teach kids, we have to help them build the skill and tolerance for wearing a mask. You know, I have a 4th grader, he'll be a 5th grader next year. I get him to wear a mask when we run out to the grocery store or something. And I just try to get him to keep it on for the whole time we're in the store. And I know he's gotten better at it over time. And so that's kind of, we have to get kids to get better at it over time. I think we can get there, and we should definitely have sessions where we teach kids how to put them on, the appropriate way to put them on, you know, and then build up their tolerance for how long they can. And Chris, Kate, you have young kids, so you know it's not, I can't imagine having him wear a mask all day long for, you know, the entire 6 hours. But I think he can get there. It's just building that tolerance. So I've been, and this is just advice, not RIDE, you know, requirements, but I would advise against a blanket policy, but rather use it as a learning opportunity and to teach kids why it's important, and that we're doing it for each other, not just for themselves, and that we need to get better at it. So let's practice it and make sure you have time for mask breaks, and that we can build that tolerance up so that in a few weeks, kids are comfortable wearing those masks all day.
Sure. Thank you.
Okay, Cody. And then we'll go to Sarah and then Sophia.
Well, thank you both for meeting with us. This has been really informative. I was one of the people who submitted a question about testing, so I'm really glad to hear that is something that there's a work stream addressing that, because I think so full disclosure, I'm a scientist, microbiologist, and so the things that are really heavily on my mind, on top of all of the social and emotional issues that are going on with our kids in thinking about this return, are the preventative measures. And so I had a question pretty similar to Kate's about masking. And my comment on that would be that I really hope that we actually move toward a policy. I agree with you that so I have a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old, and I agree with you that it's very challenging to get them to wear masks for long periods of time. And that I love the idea of having a system where we teach them and reward them and build that up. But I don't think that we should leave a lot of leeway for this being an optional activity. I think that I'm concerned about a lot of the noise that I hear from families who are saying, you know, please don't stifle my child, and this is horrifying to picture them going back in a situation where they have to wear masks, and how traumatizing is this going to be. I think the safety, well, I know that the safety benefits are just really are overwhelming as far as masking. And so I could definitely see, you know, going outside and figuring out a configuration outside to take mask breaks as a group. So I just wanted to sort of add that feedback on that. And then also with the testing, you know, if there's any way that the communities can be involved at all in sort of helping provide feedback on that, I definitely would love to be involved more. I've been involved in securing a a testing program for Roger Williams University. We've just secured frequent repeat testing for asymptomatic for the entire semester. So I definitely would love to be involved in that if that's at all possible.
Yeah, I was actually a part of their work stream. It's a lot easier when the kids you're talking about are all over 18 and can sign off on their own asymptomatic testing.
Yes.
It gets a little trickier when you have little kids.
Well, but also the testing. I mean, I think the other thing that you know, that I think we can message to the public that I think is really important is it's not about testing the kids as much as it is about testing and protecting the faculty and the staff and the families. Yeah. And you know, so adult testing I think is a really good good measure.
Yeah. Oh no, I agree. And Cody, what I've been struggling with, so I have, my son works in a nursing home, so he's been tested. He's 17, and I went. Of course, I had to take him because he's only 17. And I saw that happen, and I thought to myself, "You're only going to get a 5-year-old to do that once." So when they know what's happening, they're not going to do that again. And so we have to be thoughtful about what kids, if we're going to test students, what age group is that going to be? How are we going to do that? Is it more of a community base where parents are engaged in the, you know, and are part of the decision making, as you mentioned, so that it's not, but with teachers, we can do that as in a different way because they're adults and they can, you know, they can decide and consent. But with kids, it definitely adds another element. So I don't envy their job on that work stream, but I know they've been talking about it. That was my own thought when I saw it happen to my 17-year-old. I was like, oh yeah, you're never getting a 7-year-old to do this again. So it'll be interesting.
Yeah, I just had that test done last week, and it is you know, I mean, yeah, it's hard. It's hard. But, you know, but another comment on that is that there's a lot of technology now that's moving toward being sensitive. The sensitivity is high enough now from anterior nasal swabs, so where just a Q-tip goes in. It's not what we call the brain
tickle. We don't have those yet. The 92,000 we have are the other ones that go,
oh, really?
You know, touch your brain and come back. So we're hoping we're hoping to get some of the ones you're talking about because that
and that's what I've been lucky enough to be on a team that's really following the technology closely, and the cost is going down by orders of magnitude for the gentle swabs and for saliva based and even blood testing. So so I'm really encouraged by that, and I'm sure that Rido knows all about those, but I'd be happy to be involved as I can.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cody. Sarah Churgan, are you still on?
Yes. I'm here. Yeah.
But not driving, right, Sarah?
No, I pulled over because I knew I wanted to talk. So thank you for allowing me to ask a question. I'm Sarah Churgan. I'm the district manager for Eastern Rhode Island Conservation District and was lucky enough to be involved in the design and installation of the open classroom at Melville, which who knew, you know, and it has been so successful, and, you know, if allowed back to school will absolutely be utilized. And to that end, I have another project in mind for partnering with the middle school, and I spoke at Terry's suggestion with Stephen Osborne at RIDE from Innovation about it yesterday. It's going to be at a farm that's right up the street from the middle school. And Mr. Arruda is on board with this, completely on board with it. Margie Brennan, who's the science coach, to be able to do STEAM teaching there and having an outdoor classroom. So I had sent you an email, Anna, because I wanted to talk about this particular project and see if this would be in, you know, when we first conceived it, this was pre-COVID. We already had the open classroom as an idea, but now it's that portion is being pushed to the forefront because Mr. Arruda has said he's going to figure out a way to make it accessible with with busing for the kids to get there to be able to do the classes. So to hear that this is, and I've been reading articles a lot about it recently, which I told Terry about, just since March, of how important open classrooms are now to be an alternative for schools who are struggling with trying to figure out how to keep their kids safe at school. So I look forward to talking to you about it further.
Yes, you're on my list, Sarah. I didn't forget you.
Okay, all right.
Okay, great.
Thank you.
Can we unmute Sophia? And we got just a couple more minutes left. So I think, Sophia, you'll probably be our last person.
Hi, Thank you so
Good
much for
morning.
doing this. This is very informative. I might have missed this, but as a result of distance learning, some kids at the elementary level may have, jumped ahead if parents were able to engage with them and even supplement distance learning materials, and some may have fallen behind if parents were not able to dedicate an appropriate amount of time to distance learning because of their jobs or whatever they might have going on. Is there a plan to address the gaps that may have widened between students at each grade level?
Yes, so our instruction and assessment team has been working to put together just some priority standards that might need some review at the beginning of the school year. We're also supporting districts with an interim assessment just to have a little gauge, not for accountability's sake, but just to have a gauge of where the learning is. And for example, folks who are in Portsmouth are already familiar with STAR is one of the assessments on the data, because particularly for districts who have already been giving an assessment that measured growth, this will allow them to have a good view of what happened over time. They'll have a view baseline in September, and then come mid-year, they'll be able to give a mid-year assessment and then an end of year, that even if for some reason we don't have the RICAS again next year, which we don't know at this point what will happen over the course of the year, there won't be a second year with no data, but you'll have internal data that you can gauge around the RICAS predictor. That's a component of this test. So there are only about 35% of the districts who do that kind of internal assessment. And so we're going to be supporting districts statewide to be able to do that. Unfortunately, for the percentage of folks who haven't done it before, they won't have the growth component that districts who have been doing it will have, but they will have a RICAS predictor, which will at least give them some evidence of where students' outcomes were going to be. And just for those of you who aren't familiar with the test, it is not a very time-consuming test. The test in total doesn't take more than 22 minutes, and it's given beginning of the year, middle of the year, end of the year. In Portsmouth, it's used a little more extensively because it's also used for progress monitoring and intervention, but it is not a days and hours of testing to gauge, like the RICAS is. It's a very quick test, but will give you some data around, some predictability around what's happened to student learning over the course of the year.
Okay, great, thanks. I have two more questions. It should be quick.
That was a great question, Sophia.
Is it okay if I have two more? Do I have time?
Terri, we have one more person with their hand up, Suzanne McDonald.
How about one more question, Sophia, and then we'll move to Suzanne, and then we're gonna call it a morning because we said 1 hour. So,
And then Terri, you can give out your email address in case anybody wants to email you additional questions that you can follow up on.
Yes, I think
this
most
might
of
have
the
been
people I recognize on this call and know how to get a hold of me, but can you put that in the chat? Can you show that, Donna? So that people
Yes, I'll put it in the chat for you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, so I might have missed this as well, so I apologize if I did, but I heard that the children will be in pods. Will the unified arts teachers travel to the classrooms, or will the students continue to transition into sort of the unified arts classrooms and the lunchrooms and all that, or are they kind of staying in one space?
I have seen a mix of that, or heard a mix of that for the plans, but I haven't seen the plans yet, so I don't know what that looks like. I know there were some variations where we talked about in some places that the art teacher would come to the classroom. Then we also had some places where the art teacher would be in the building but doing a virtual lesson. So I don't know, I haven't seen the plans yet, so I don't know what that looks like, but there was a pretty broad mix of what they were doing with specials.
Okay.
Okay, and Suzanne, do you want to wrap us up? You need to unmute.
Yep, got it. So thank you so much. This has been super, super helpful. I have been reporting notes back to the C. Rose Montessori School Board in Portsmouth. And I have two questions. One is, and I'm sorry I popped on a little bit late. What does it look like in terms of, if Melville or Pell schools close, would we then, would we be expecting town-wide closures? And then the second question is in terms of funding for cleaning and things like that, are private schools going to have access to any additional funds?
Yours was the first question I asked this morning, I think, Suzanne.
Oh, sorry.
And I don't know that, Suzanne, so I told Terri I would get back to her on that, so I will send her an answer back on that. But in terms of the closing, it would not necessarily mean that you would close. You would have that conversation with RIDO. If you didn't have any impacted families or any direct contacts, there would be no reason for you to close. But
Okay.
I'm not a medical expert. That's just what I've heard them say. So I would say you would contact
that's what I heard
RIDO
too,
and they
but
would help you. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, great. That's really helpful. I mean, we're a small school. We have about 30 families, and our parents are discussing what can we as adults do to make decisions to keep their teachers and the students safe. Obviously, when you're at a much bigger school, it's a lot more complicated, but you know, we do what we can. That's the whole goal here, right?
For everybody, I think.
Yeah.
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 Thank you so much. This has been great.
Great. So I do want to thank you, Anna. I'm very grateful that you took the time, and I'm glad for everybody that logged in. I hope you found this informative. Send me questions if you didn't hear what you needed to hear. Feel free to send me a question, and I think we'll probably put this video up so that other people can log in and at their convenience and listen to the discussion, because I think it was very informative for everybody. So thank you for joining me. I appreciate it. And thank you, Anna.
Thank you. Have a great day.
Thank
All right,
you.
everybody have a
Thanks.
good day.
Have a good one. Take care.
Bye. Take care.